the Federal Environment Minister, Tony Burke, has thrown down the gauntlet to Victoria. He's decided the coalition broke federal law by allowing cattle into the Alpine National Park. Mr Burke says Victoria now has 15 working days to get the cattle out. He spoke to me from our Canberra studio. Tony Burke, thanks for joining 7:30 Victoria.
Good to be with you.
Tony Burke, you've decided that Victoria acted illegally by allowing cattle back into the Alpine National Park. What's your next move?
The Victorian Government now has until the 8th of April to either voluntarily refer the matter to me for approval, or I will simply deem it to have been referred. Either way, by the 8th of April, the cattle will have to be out, and we will be going through the full federal process of environmental assessment.
What if the Victorian Government and the cattlemen defy your orders?
Well, I think for the Victorian Government, it's one thing for them to have ignored the law or not treated national environmental law seriously. I think it would be another thing altogether if they went down a path of deliberately flouting it. I've had no indication that they'd go that far. The levels of irresponsibility that I've seen so far, I think, are probably at the limit of what we could expect.
What sort of response did you get from the Victorian Government when you told them that they'd broken the law?
The communication, I've sent a letter through to them today, and that my department had advised their department shortly before I made the announcement. I think from the conversation so far, they probably knew it was coming. They knew that we were asking for information. They were providing it, first of all, on a drip feed. We then gave them a hard deadline, and some of our questions still remained unanswered. So I really don't think today's announcement would come as a great surprise to them.
One cattleman, Philip Maguire, isn't part of the Victorian trial but says he's grazing his cattle in the park anyway and that no one can force him to remove those cows. Can you force the cows out if the cattlemen don't comply?
Well, if the Victorian Government's telling the truth, and if the Victorian Government is seriously saying that they manage the national park properly and this is something that they thought would be okay, then the Victorian Government, you'd think, would be kicking out anyone else who took cattle in. If you take domestic pets into a national park, the national parks authorities around the nation usually come down on you like a ton of bricks. If Mr Maguire's story is true, then it would make a lie of everything the Victorian Government's been saying publicly if they're willing to turn a blind eye to that one.
But you're talking tough, but can you realistically, as a federal minister, force them to remove those cows?
Well, certainly on the trial that we're talking about, that's the one that I've sought advice on. On the Maguire issue, we've seen it through the media. I've asked my department to have a look at it and to investigate it. If it's true, it wouldn't just be something where you'd question whether it was legal or illegal under federal law. It's almost certainly illegal under Victorians' own principles for managing their national parks. So I would have thought that would be stopped before it ever got to us, unless the Victorian Government has levels of irresponsibility in the national park even beyond what they've stated publicly so far.
Do you believe this has been a political exercise rather than a scientific study?
Well, certainly as a scientific study, from what we've seen so far, it just doesn't add up. I mean, how do you conduct a scientific study without a baseline? How do you work out what the impact of cattle will be without checking what it was like before you put the cattle in? The basic scientific principles appear to have been ignored here, and our very first request was, can you give us a copy of the proposal? This meant we asked that in January. Nothing ever arrived, nothing. As a political proposal, if that's right, how tragic is that? To actually play games with the health of endangered wetlands in a national park for the sake of some so-called political advantage in a marginal seat. All I can say on that is I ideally hope that's not the case.
You've spoken very strongly about this trial. You've compared it to Japanese whaling. Isn't it now a foregone conclusion that whatever process you're about to embark on, you've already made your mind up?
I've made up my mind up that I think it's wrong. I don't resile from that for one bit. I haven't made up my mind as to whether or not it's illegal under federal law for the next stage of the process.
Wouldn't it be fair for the Victorian Government to think that they never stand a chance, that you will not be able to impartially judge whether they have in fact broken federal law because you're obviously against it?
They will have no trouble second-guessing whether I believe what they've done is wrong. I think it's wrong. Simple as that. Don't step away from that for 1 minute. Whether it's legal or illegal, I'll wait till I get the next stage of advice.
Tony Burke, thank you very much for joining 7:30 Victoria.
Good to be with you.